A little while ago, I was given some feedback by a friend of mine, which I found quite interesting. He had reached out to me and a bunch of other people. He was putting together a sort of farewell book for an old employer of ours, and he was reaching out to people that had worked with them to say, can you write a message about your time working with them? And I took the next sort of 10 minutes to write up, a couple of paragraphs on, my experience, and I just emailed it back. And he said this, I quote, "It's funny, you replied instantly. I've only had 3 replies from about 50 or 60 people that I've contacted. I've had more than that for people who love the idea and will reply by the deadline, but I love that you just did it instantly. Another person who runs their own business now did the same. I think it just says something." This got me thinking, because it's quite common for me to deal with tasks and requests and emails in this way. Often I'll just think, you know what, I'll just deal with it now. I'd rather not have this hanging over me. I don't want the other person having to chase me up either. So let me just deal with it now rather than postponing it till later. And in this case, I decided, it's only going to take me 10 minutes to write what I need to write. That way I don't have to add anything to my to-do list. I don't have to schedule it for later. I can just do the work now and then move on to something else. But it sounds like, based on my friend's feedback, that it's actually quite common for people to kick the can down the road and postpone things until later. And I think if you look at different productivity apps and software, sometimes software actually encourages us to do this. For example, with different email clients, you can snooze your email. If you receive an email, you can snooze it and say, I don't want to deal with this now. Tell me about this again in a day. I never use snoozing features. Either I respond to emails immediately, or I'll leave it in my inbox until later in the day, and I'll deal with it later in the day. But I would never sort of kick something off until, 3 or 5 days' time. Sometimes I might schedule a task to actually follow up later, but at least I'm actually triaging the email and dealing with it. I feel like snoozing is just your way of saying, I don't even want to think about this now. Send this back to me in 5 days. And really you are just kicking the can down the road. Other productivity tools like Asana and Slack have options where you can get a reminder about a message later. If you don't want to read something now and deal with it now, get a reminder to come back to it tomorrow or in a few days' time. Again, I don't really use these features because you're just kicking the can down the road. And then you've got read it later services for things like articles or links that you find online. Maybe you don't want to deal with it now, and so you save these articles for later. Again, I don't really use these services. If an article is interesting, I'll read it now, or if it's not, I generally won't make time for it. I'm not going to queue up a bunch of things to read later, because I feel like with all of these things, the more you kick the can down the road, the more you're just sort of postponing things till later. I think it adds to that sort of mental burden and backlog that we just sort of like, I've got to come back to that thing. I need to reply to my friend. So it adds to that mental burden and fatigue. And I just think it's more efficient to, if you can, just deal with things immediately. And look, I don't want to be too cynical. I understand that these features in these productivity tools are useful to some people. I'm sure I've got people watching or listening who are like, no, Paul, you don't understand. These features are, if you use it properly, it's useful. And I understand that. I think the issue with a lot of people is that these read it later, remind me later, snooze features just get abused, and people overuse these features instead of actually doing the work right now. Now, of course, you can't do everything immediately. There are going to be certain tasks and requests that come in that require more time, more energy, some focus and attention for you to just go and deal with. And so those things should be put on your task list or blocked on your calendar, and you can come back to those things later. But instead of your default mindset or your default behavior being, I'll come back to that later, try and instead make your default, how can I deal with this right now? And just making that mental switch will help you to reduce that mental backlog and burden of things that you're trying to get through. And you'll have fewer things on your task list, fewer things that you need to follow up on and get done. You'll actually just experience more of like a stress-free work life because your task lists and things to do, there's just a lot less of that stuff building up. So try this yourself. Let me know how you get on. If you have any questions, comments, or feedback, leave me a comment below. You can also find me on Twitter @PaulMiners. Thank you very much for watching. See you in the next video.